Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm a teacher and author, and this is English Nerd. If you like classic literature, then check out Laertes, a Hamlet retelling. It's available anywhere you get books. If you like dark academia vibes, found family, ghosts, murder, and basically just Shakespearean goodness. Today, we are going back into Dante's Inferno for the next two cantos. This is bound to be a shorter video than the last. All of them, really. They've typically been 20 to 30 minutes. This one's inevitably going to be a lot shorter because there's a little less that happens in Canto 17 and 18. However, there's some dramatic moments. It's very exciting. And honestly, it's just really nice to get past rounds 2 and 3 of Circle 7 because there are some really painful things to talk about in those sections, and this is much less so. So at the end of Canto 16, Dante and Virgil come to the end of that cliff. It's the end of Circle 7, beginning of Circle 8, and they're unable to get down on their own. Virgil has taken the belt that Dante wears around his waist and has cast it over the side almost like he's fishing for something, and then the last we heard, a figure comes out of the murk, and we did not get a good look at it in the previous canto, so the beginning of this next canto explains what it is that is rising up out of that murk, and it is Geryon. Geryon is the most elaborate monster creature in all of the Inferno. We get lots of good description, and he is the monster of fraud. Because remember, all of these monsters and creatures and such that guard the different circles have something to do with that particular sin that they're associated with, and they have a job as well. So in this case, guarding Circle 8, which is all about fraud. There are lots of different types of fraud, as we'll figure out when we get down there, but all of Circle 8 is characterized by fraud, intentional fraud. All of lower hell is intentional, remember. Okay, so it begins and we get a great description of this thing. So I'm just going to read it to you. I'll show you a picture, which is one of the only illustrations that's out there that I have seen of Geryon, and you can decide how much of it is accurate and how much of it is not. Last year I had a good time picking it apart with my students who pointed out from the text how it doesn't actually match up very well. So this is line 7, where I'm beginning. Line 7, Canto 17. The filthy prototype of fraud drew near and settled his head and breast upon the edge of that dark cliff, but let his tail hang clear. The posture is important. His face was innocent of every guile, benign and just in feature and expression, and under it his body was half reptile. His 2 great paws were hairy to the armpits, and his back and breast and both his flanks were figured with bright knots and subtle circlets. So we get most of his description up here. There's a little bit more, a couple of stanzas down, but the important things are the first part that you can see of Geryon, this creature, is about what you can see of me, right? Everybody's been in Zoom meetings and things where you're all dressed up on the top half and then not so much on the bottom half. And that's what's going on with Geryon. He's presenting his best features first. He has this face that has a benign and just expression. There's a very strong idea that it's a human face that looks kind and approachable and good initially. So you have that, but the rest of the body is this mashup of different beastly characteristics. So we have these hairy paws and arms. There's the reptilian body that is a lot of different colors. It sounds like a really fascinating creature, which is why I looked up pictures, right? And then if you go a couple of stanzas further down, it says his tail twitched in the void beyond that lip. Remember, you can't see the tail initially. thrashing and twisting up the envenomed fork, which like a scorpion's stinger armed the tip. So he essentially has this scorpion tail. This is really important because you think about the nature of fraud. Initially, it looks like you can trust a person, otherwise fraud's not going to work. You can trust a person, and once you've kind of gained them into your confidence and you learn more about the person, then they'll sting you, they'll get you, especially in the back. I mean, all of that just seems so on point for a symbol of fraud. You could pick apart each element of that description, and it's such a crazy monster. But I really like Geryon as a sort of character in Dante's Inferno. So Virgil, I think this is honestly a pretty funny section, because Virgil is, as soon as we get that long description, he says, "It is time now we drew near that monster." And then he goes closer to this creature. But while he's sort of getting it ready to, it turns out, fly them down to the next section, he says, "Oh, I guess you ought to finish up your last bit of information up here in Circle 7. So there are some usurers over there. Just don't take long." So Dante heads on over. He sees the loan sharks, the usurers, who are crouching on the sand, which I mentioned in the last video, but we didn't actually see because Dante didn't talk to any of them. And they have these purses around their necks. They're huddled in this circle. They're crying and looking across at other people's money pouches, which are, of course, empty because they don't have any possessions here in the Inferno. But it's a good eye for an eye sort of image of what loan sharks would do to people. And so now they're lusting after money, and they can't get to it, much like they did in life in that intentionally harmful way. So there's so that's the Cliff Notes version of what goes on there. When Dante returns, Virgil is already sitting on top of Geryon, sort of in the back by the tail, so he can shield Dante from getting hit. And he says, "Okay, why don't you sit, a little further up on this thing, and we'll fly down." I mean, to be Dante at this moment, that has to be very, very stressful to get onto this evil-looking creature thing and jump off the edge of this massive cliff. The drama is so fantastic. And so it's like something out of a cartoon. He gets on top of the Geryon's back, and Virgil hangs on to him, and then Geryon just floats down. I picture the way that Geryon flies kind of like the alien creatures in the Avengers, the original Avengers movie. They're going through the buildings of New York. They're huge, because we don't get a description of wings here. In the picture that I showed you, there were wings, but he's not described as having wings. He can fly, though. So he flies slowly down, and I noted, this struck me as I was preparing for this video, that Dante doesn't even feel like he's going down, except for a slight wind on his face. And that also relates to fraud really well, because too often you can't really tell that things are going badly until all of a sudden you're where you do not want to be, and the fraud has taken place and you don't even know how it happened. So yeah, that was a cool detail. So Geryon sets him down. They get off of its back, and then it says that Geryon shoots from there into the dark like an arrow into air. So the creature did not need to go that slowly, but it did, and then it flies off really quickly, leaving Dante and Virgil in Circle 8. We've arrived in Circle 8. Circle 8 is one of the only circles that has a special name. The only one that we've encountered before this is Circle 1, called Limbo. Circle 8 is called Malebolge. Malebolge means evil ditches or evil pouches. There are going to be 10 of those evil ditches in Malebolge. which just gives you the idea that Dante believes that if people are really committed to these different sins in their lives, then more often than not, it's the worse ones. I mean, if you just look at, in my book, so this is lower hell and this is upper hell. There's just so much more of lower hell, even though it's the number of circles is actually less. So, Malebolge, we see the first evil ditch here. All of them are fraud, but just different types of fraud. So my book has a convenient picture. I'm going to show you guys. Here we go. Okay. So there's the ditch, and then there's sort of a rock bridge that you can go over. So it's convenient. They don't need to go actually into each of the ditches, although they will go into most of them to talk to different people. The first group that Dante and Virgil encounter here are, my translation says, the panderers and seducers. So pander is a word that actually you saw if you've been watching this series back in Circle 2 with Francesca. It's back here again. Panderer is an old term that means a pimp, basically just selling the sexual services and things like that of others, and then getting the money. But there are two groups of people who are related, kind of like the hoarders and the wasters were together, the wrathful and the sullen were together. Here we have the panderers, or the pimps, and seducers. So the people who send others out to do that work and the people who do it themselves. Again, very intentionally. This is different than the lustful. Those are people who fell into it, who didn't have control over their passions. These are people who think, yes, today this is what I'm going to be doing, and even though I know that it's going to hurt people. That is the idea. So an example of a seducer would be Jason, like Jason and the Argonauts, because he intentionally seduced a woman and then left her and then abandoned her while she was pregnant to go on his adventures. So obviously there is collateral damage there. What's happening with the panderers and seducers is that they are walking in these concentric circles in opposite directions, but they're both being driven forward by these, it says they're these devils, black as pitch. All the sinners are naked, which they all are throughout all of hell, and so of course they're just emphasizing the nature of the crime. But it says that all of these demons, they're horned demons with enormous lashes, enormous whips that move through the soul, scourging them on the back. And, they're driving them on to go where when they really don't want to be going in that direction. So here we have some contrapasso, as we always do, with Dante and the way he organizes things. A few different elements of it are contrapasso. You have people being driven into situations that they do not want to be a part of, but they are forced into it. So there's that aspect of it. You also have the horned demons, as opposed to other demons that we'll see later on. And there was an association with having an unfaithful spouse, and the person whose spouse was unfaithful was cuckolded or was sometimes caricatured as having horns. So, there's that aspect of it. Dante does recognize some people on the panderers side, but I never really emphasize them, and I don't think that they're particularly important. So, Dante and Virgil move on really quickly from this section. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the only canto that deals with two whole sections in one go. We saw like a circle and a half earlier on with circle 4 and 5, but here we have two entire sections. So Bolgia 1, Bolgia just means that pit or ditch or pouch, right? Like Malebolge. Bolgia 1 is for the panderers and seducers. Bolgia 2, as they move on, is for the flatterers. So those who lie and flatter in order to get better positions, even though, once again, they're intentionally committing this fraud and knowing that it might be harmful and dishonest, and they just don't care. And what's happening to them is that there is a river of excrement, as my translator very nicely puts it, that seem to overflow the world's latrines. And it's in that river of excrement, that poop river, that you have all of the flatterers. And so I don't blame Dante and Virgil for not spending any time there, really. This also could have been part of the reason why they had to pause after circle 6 and recoup, acclimate to lower hell, just because the stench is so bad. It's like, of course it is. This entire section is just excrement that people are in. They're all smeared. It's disgusting. So as they were full of it, now it is full of them. Is the contrabasso there? Whew. Dante does make a point to mention that there are some people in this section that are tonsured, so that is the monk haircut where you're bald on top and you have the hair on the outside. At several different points, like every other circle, basically, Dante points out that there are members of the church, even popes and things, people like that, in these different sections. And so Dante, of course, was Catholic. He was devout, but he also wanted church reform, and apparently he thought that flattery was something that people were prone to, just like the hoarders and wasters. He said that there were a lot of people from the church there as well. So yeah, he wanted some reform. He's pointing out some of the particular sins that he sees, the corruption that he sees. So that is it. Bolgia 1, Bolgia 2 of circle 8. That is it for today's video. And next time we will see some really fascinating stuff, so make sure to stay tuned. All right. Like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit those notifications. There are lots of videos about lots of different English nerdy things. So I hope to see you very soon.